Imagine waking up one day and you get this in your email.
Greetings. We regret to inform you this account has been permanently deactivated as a result of violating the code of conduct with your character name. We cannot allow names such as "please do not report me," as it is in direct violation of the following sections of our code of conduct.
So I'm active in a bunch of Elder Scrolls Online related Discord servers, and I've noticed something as of late. People have been getting suspensions left and right. When you're in a player versus player community, this is kind of par for the course. PvP can be a volatile environment where tensions run high and people get annoyed and they make impulsive decisions on how to engage with their opponents. This has never been different, and over the years I've seen plenty of players get in trouble over things where I'm like, yeah, you kinda had that one coming. I'm talking about things like trying to blackmail another player, willfully and repeatedly using game-breaking exploits, or using slurs in zone chat. You can have a discussion about what kind of punishment these deeds merit, but every player knows, or should know, ZeniMax does not take kindly to this, and it's pretty easy to avoid trouble by just not doing any of these things. What I've been noticing more recently though is a rise in another category of bans. Guildmates will post emails about temporary or permanent bans where my first reaction is, really? You got in trouble for that? I'm talking about bans like the one mentioned in the intro, where a friend lost his account permanently because of a frankly inoffensive name, a cheeky joke at the absolute worst. He's not the only one though. Another player in the guild got an email a few days later informing him that he would be forced to change his user ID, Lord Nibbler. He had been playing with his very user ID since the game's launch, so he'd had it for over 10 years and now it suddenly became a problem. Not only was he forced to change it, he was also given a 72-hour suspension from the game, and he was informed that his next infraction would result in a permanent ban from the game. Needless to say, the warning that your next misstep will be your last is a bit of an ominous threat when it's so unclear where the barrier is of what's accepted and what isn't. So, what exactly is going on? In this video, I will go over the mechanics behind the report and ban systems in the Elder Scrolls Online, point out the various problems with them, and suggest a few possible solutions to make this MMO a more enjoyable place for its players. Before we start, I want to clarify that I am not making this video to contest specific bans or other disciplinary decisions made by ZeniMax. I also implore anyone watching this to always communicate with representatives of the company in a mature and respectful manner. I will not include any screenshots of the company's official communication, and I only refer to specific cases in order to illustrate a larger point about what I think are inadequacies in the way that suspensions and the associated report system work in the Elder Scrolls Online. Ultimately, this is meant to be a video that sparks some constructive discussion regarding these topics. To figure out what exactly is happening with so many people losing their accounts, first we must outline how punishments are actually handed out to players who are determined to have broken the rules. Before I do that, I should stress that the developers nor the publishers of this game have, to my knowledge, ever publicly outlined how their disciplinary system works. So the information I'm about to give is based on second-hand experience. While I have so far never personally received a warning of any kind, I have, over the years, come to know dozens of people who've been on the receiving end of them. It's with this information that I've been able to piece together approximately how the system works. However, one of the characteristics of their ban system is that it doesn't appear to be wholly consistent, so you may have experiences that differ from what I'm about to describe. To be clear, no ZeniMax employee has been consulted for this video. When you are caught breaking a rule, you will get an email from ESO customer support informing you of the nature of the infraction and the punishment it carries. There seem to be three categories of punishment. The first is a mere verbal warning. You are informed that you are doing something that is against the rules and that, if you continue doing it, you risk a suspension. The second category is that suspension, which lasts for 72 hours. The player is informed that their crime carries such weight that it will result in them losing access to their account for 3 whole days. The third category is the permaban. The player will lose access to their account, including all characters, collectibles, achievements and purchases they have made in-game. There's also a sort of hidden fourth category of punishment that is even more severe than the permaban. Usually, even after a permaban, players do appear to be allowed to make a new account and start from scratch. In some rare cases, however, a player will get fired as a customer. This means that they will be banned from not just ESO, but all games owned by Microsoft, which includes all products by ZeniMax Media, such as ESO. This is Microsoft effectively telling you, we don't want your money, so as you can imagine, it is a rare occurrence that requires you to go above and beyond with your rule breaking. I did want to mention it though, as it'll come up a bit later. Taking the rare fired as a customer category out of the equation for now, that leaves us with 3 possibilities when you are determined to have broken a rule: a verbal warning, a 72-hour suspension, and a permaban. Out of these, the verbal warning and the 72-hour suspension are usually a player's first interaction with the disciplinary system. Initially, most infractions will either get a verbal warning or lead straight to a 72-hour ban. A permaban is usually given after multiple of these smaller warnings. The most common sequence I've been able to distill from other players' encounters with the game's disciplinary system is as follows. The first offense carries either a verbal warning or a 72-hour suspension. If the offense happens to be a name that is determined to be against the rules, that name will also be forcibly changed. The second offense comes with a 72-hour suspension, as well as an additional warning that the next offense will result in a permanent deactivation of the account. As I just indicated, the third offense tends to be the proverbial last straw, where the player loses their account indefinitely. So there we have the outlines of a pretty basic 3-strike system. You screw up 3 times and you're out. However, it is not as clear-cut as that. For one, the nature of the offense does seem to matter quite a lot. Foul language or bad character names tend to be regarded as lesser offenses, whereas things such as using a cheat engine or botting will likely result in an immediate permaban, regardless of prior warnings. Instant permabans are also likely to occur when you do things that screw with the company's bottom line. So for example, if you buy crowns, ESO's in-game currency that you can buy with real money, spend all of them in the game and then do a chargeback, that is a surefire and admittedly pretty stupid way to lose your account. So in a way, the nature of the offense has a real impact on the punishment you'll receive for it, as you'd expect. But again, there is a caveat here. The more warnings you'll accrue on your account, the less relevant the actual weight of your offense will become. This means that if you are on your final warning, pretty much anything can be that aforementioned last straw, which is how people usually get permabanned over seemingly innocuous offenses. So when people post to, for example, Reddit that they got banned over this minor thing, always take into account that they may have an ample disciplinary record that they're not disclosing. Okay, but couldn't you just make sure you abide by the rules if you know you're on your final warning? This is where, in my view, the real problems begin. As in ESO, knowing what is or isn't allowed is not as straightforward as you might think. When it comes to the rules of the Elder Scrolls Online, the only place to really turn to is the ZeniMax Media Terms of Service Agreement that you have to sign when you first start up the game. And indeed, when players argue about the rules, they will often refer to the TOS. Either by pointing out a player could have known what they were doing was wrong because it is covered by the TOS, or by denying any wrongdoing because their infraction is not specified in the TOS. However, this confuses what this or indeed any TOS agreement is for and who it is for. The TOS isn't there to clearly outline to players what they can and cannot do. It is simply a legal document that allows ZeniMax to terminate your account without getting sued. As such, when you want to argue for a ban to be lifted based on a TOS, you're out of your depth, because that document exists so that the company, from a legal perspective, is not obligated to do that. This doesn't mean that discussion is never possible. Support will always cite which section of the TOS they believe you broke, although they won't always say specifically what you did wrong. Some players have been able to argue their way out of a ban, citing the TOS, but their success seems to depend on the severity of the infraction as well as the good grace of the customer support agent in question. What all of this also means is that the TOS is nebulous by design. Every paragraph is worded in such a way that it covers for most eventualities and provides ZeniMax Media and its subsidiaries, which includes both ESO's developer ZeniMax Online Studios and its publisher, Bethesda Softworks, a large amount of liberty when it comes to handling your account. In the TOS, it even states that by playing, you agree that you do not own your account or anything associated with it, and that ZeniMax can do basically anything they want to it. From a legal point of view, them informing a player what they got suspended for is a courtesy, though again they will grant you this courtesy in nearly every case. So this brings us back to the problem of not really knowing what is or isn't allowed. As I said before, some things are pretty clear-cut. If you try to scam ZeniMax out of money or you are cheating in a way that they can detect, if they catch you, you will lose your account. Simple as. And I doubt many people would take issue with that. The problems begin when we enter the large gray area of possible offenses. One of the more contentious issues is that of players who are getting punished for having names that allegedly break the TOS. Now, breaking the TOS with a character name or user ID is not as difficult as you might think. Everyone will understand that if you choose a name that is overtly racist or sexist, you're not gonna get away with it. But there are also other names that are not allowed. These include, for example, names coinciding with Elder Scrolls lore characters or locations. So, for example, naming your character Vivek after the living god of Morrowind is against TOS. So is naming it Fungal Grotto after the game's first dungeon. There is a famous example of a player who got a permaban that I believe was later reverted for the user ID Cloudrest, which is the name of one of the trials in the game. There is a bit more context to this story that is not relevant for now, but it does illustrate that ZeniMax actually do act upon this stipulation. What is less known even to seasoned players of ESO is that names of any third party's trademark, copyright or other intellectual property are against TOS. So, according to this, naming your character or account Ganondorf or Samus Aran or Walter White is not allowed. Given the variations of Geralt of Rivia I run into at the crafting stations every day, I don't think this rule is enforced all that much, but these players are technically all in violation of the TOS, presumably without even knowing it. Then there's a category of names that get players in trouble that just seems like they are pushing it beyond even the purposefully vague outlines of the TOS. In the beginning of my video, I mentioned the example of a friend who got permabanned for the character name "Please do not report me." The part of the TOS it supposedly violated was that it was not allowed to discuss any legal matters involving ZeniMax Media, its affiliates, or any of their associated companies through ZeniMax services and sites. Deciphering legalese is a challenge of itself, but if I'm reading it right, a report filed by a player is here defined as a legal matter. And not just any report, but a hypothetical report that doesn't actually exist. This seems like quite a stretch of the definition of a legal matter. If we run with this definition, any player who says in Cyrodiil Zone Chat that they have just reported a player for cheating is in violation of the same article, as they are openly discussing an ongoing report through the ZeniMax service that is Elder Scrolls Online. Now, for disclosure, this wasn't the first recent warning that this player had received. A few weeks earlier, he had gotten a permaban for the guild name Prism on Top, Nova Trash. In this case, the guild name was considered harassment. Odds are you don't even know what the guild name refers to, so I'll briefly explain. Prism is the ball group that this player is one of the founders of. Project Nova is another ball group that is one of the top tier guilds active on PCEU. The ball group community on the server is quite small, so Prism and Project Nova have a number of players that play with each other interchangeably. You would be hard pressed to look at any of their recent raid compositions and not at least find a couple of players who are playing with both guilds consistently. Even the player who made the Prism on Top Nova Trash guild has raided with Project Nova, and members of both guilds have always kept positive and friendly relations with one another on a personal level. And even if we were to disregard this context, trash is hardly the worst thing you can say about another guild. Read Cyrodiil Zone Chat on any given night and I'm sure you can find a dozen or so worse qualifications out there in the open. Eventually, the permaban was revoked and instead converted into a final warning. And then just a few weeks later, this player was determined to have reoffended with the aforementioned name, "Please do not report me." I should note that he had been playing with this character name since well before the previous offense. Just to paint a broader picture, I want to grab two more examples to try and show you the threshold of what can get you in trouble when it comes to naming conventions. The first is a guildie who got a 72-hour suspension over the character name Lick My Netch. This example was also cited in a video that Nefas made a while ago, but I want to give some extra context. He had this character name for multiple years on his warden, the Netch of course being the animal companion that is one of the hallmarks of the aesthetics of this class. In the message he got informing him of the suspension, the article cited was the one that includes a passage about it not being allowed to create an account name or persona that is sexually graphic. Now, to be clear, we are talking about the name Lick My Netch. And sure, you could argue that there is a bit of innuendo going on if you'd replace Netch with certain body parts, but is it really more suggestive than the erotic smut you can find and read in the game? Or what about Smolder Scrolls Online, the tongue-in-cheek dating sim that can be found on ESO's official website, where you can engage in highly suggestive scenarios with a handful of characters from the game? It's understandable that a respected company doesn't want a bunch of people running around in their game named after porn actresses or clinical descriptions of procreation, but if a character name barely even meets the standards of PG-13 smut, whose sensibilities are we even protecting here? Much of the same can be said for the example I named earlier, but want to contextualize a bit more. A player who recently had his user ID forcibly changed with a TOS stipulation about sexually explicit names again being cited. That name being, as said, Lord Nibbler. I initially thought that the reason for the change would be the fact that it's based on a Futurama character, Lord Nibbler, a copyrighted third-party character. But no, it does seem that the mere mention of a nipple is considered offensive enough to warrant action. The thing I just can't get over is that this player had that name since launch. If someone can go through the game with this user ID for a full decade without anyone seemingly batting an eye, can it really be that offensive? I mean, I don't even think I have to censor this name for YouTube, and that's saying a lot. And even if it does warrant action, did they really have to give the guy a 72-hour suspension to boot and inform him that, despite this only being his second ever warning, he's now one misstep away from a permaban? And I'm just gonna say it, this is a paying customer. All the people I mentioned are or were paying customers. I'm always hesitant to drop this line because I full well realize that participating in an online game as a paying customer does not absolve you from having to follow the rules. But in this case I just wonder, why does it all have to be so heavy-handed? If someone has spent thousands of hours enjoying your game and giving you not insignificant amounts of money, would it really hurt the bottom line if you just talk to them like a normal human being? Like, hey man, we noticed an issue with your account. Here's what you can do to fix it without us having to suspend you. No harm done. It also begs the question, why now? Why are players getting in trouble over seemingly inconsequential decisions they made months or even years ago? Like when they created a guild, a character, or the very account they've been playing on all this time. Now the next part is going to be a bit more speculative, in the sense that I do have a pretty good idea what is going on, but it would be difficult if not impossible to prove, at least when it comes to tying it to these specific cases. I do know for a fact that what I will describe regarding the report system is a real problem that I think should be addressed. There are several avenues we can explore when we try to find out why these cases seem to pop up more and more, even for decade-old offenses. There's been a lot of controversy as of late regarding claims that ZeniMax are using an AI to scan and flag private chats between players. This is based on people getting suspensions over things they said in private to a friend who they know did not report them. I don't want to get into this now for several reasons. First, we don't know for sure what, if any, new technology is being used, and all accounts of this system are highly speculative at best. Technology to automatically flag inappropriate language in MMOs has been around for ages. Besides, ZeniMax community manager Kevin has already come out and said that suspensions are ultimately always handled by a human, and there is no rogue AI going around banning people for role-playing or silly names. Lastly, I also don't think this is what's going on with the cases I mentioned, as all of the speculation regarding artificial intelligence moderation pertains to in-game messages, not names of characters, guilds, or accounts. What I suspect to be the case very much involves humans. When I look at which friends tend to get in trouble over cheeky names or similar offenses, all of them have one thing in common. They are PvPers. PvP is where most of the player reports will happen. It is an inherently hostile interaction between player bases, and while this hostility is part of what's just a game, it can often devolve into something more personal. In a recent video, I already explained the problem many of the higher end PvPers experience when they play, namely that they'll get multiple threats every evening from enemy players that they are being reported for cheating. Of course, when you report someone for cheating and they aren't actually cheating, nothing will come of it. But what if you could report that same player for something ZeniMax is eager to act upon? Something like a cheeky name. Like I said, this would be impossible to prove because, understandably, ZeniMax doesn't disclose whether you've been reported, let alone by whom. But realistically, how many other possibilities are there? If names such as Lick My Netch or Lord Nippler are perceived as a problem after multiple years, someone or something has to have taken notice of them. And since this disproportionately seems to affect successful and therefore not always popular PvPers, I think the most likely scenario is that they're being reported by one or more players who are simply salty about being defeated by the same player over and over again, and decide to get back at them in another manner. Were it simply an algorithm picking these names out, you'd expect some sort of consistency, but as of writing this, the current Emperor of Greyhost has a more offensive character name than any of the ones I've mentioned so far. While my point about players being reported for names by salty rivals is hypothetical, it does step into a real point about the report system in ESO that I think most veteran PvP players will be aware of to some degree. Namely that, at least in PvP, this system is often used, or rather abused, to get players in trouble, rather than reporting legitimate gripes people have with the game or the players in it. You see, ESO's report system is rather complex. There are some actions that are considered okay by themselves, but can come to be considered harassment under certain circumstances. The most prominent example is teabagging. Teabagging is the act of repeatedly tapping the crouch button, usually on an enemy player's corpse, as a way of taunting them. This by itself is allowed within ESO, but if the receiving player tells you to stop doing it and you continue anyway, then it is considered harassment. So if you, as a player, can prove that someone continued to teabag you after you told them to stop, you can get that player suspended or banned. There are already multiple videos by other creators on whether or not teabagging should even be considered offensive under any circumstance, but I don't want to get into that here as it is not relevant to the point. That point being that this context-sensitive ambiguity of the ESO report system is what makes it vulnerable to being weaponized by bad actors, particularly in PvP. To name an example, a few years ago in a PvP guild I was in, a player got a 72-hour ban for teabagging. The nefarious act was caught on video, and the receiving player could prove that he had warned the offender not to teabag again beforehand. Case closed, right? The only issue was that when the player sent the original warning to stop teabagging, he had not actually been teabagged yet. So what had happened was that the offending player had effectively been baited into teabagging the victim. And yeah, you could argue that it was stupid of the suspended player to fall for it in the first place, but by that same measure, it is obvious that this kind of baiting is not within the spirit of the rules. This kind of stuff happens all the time. Players will report their rivals over minute inconveniences that do not actually bother them at all, but they see it as a way to get back at players they can't take down in an actual fight, or just have a general dislike for. It's even worse when a guild decides to mass report someone, as that does appear to trigger an automatic ban system of sorts, though that's a whole story by itself. Some players will even delve into their archives to find interactions from months or even years prior to get someone in trouble, as there doesn't appear to be a statute of limitations, or support simply doesn't verify the date of an occurrence. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that by now there is a rich tradition in PvP of abusing the support system to try and make rival players lose their accounts. The recent trend of specifically PvP players catching temporary or permanent suspensions over seemingly innocent names is in line with this tradition. Why go through the trouble of reporting someone for a teabag that never happened or a cheat engine that you deep down know they aren't using, when you can just make a big fuss about a username that may technically be against the widely interpretable terms of service? As I explained, a lot of this is conjecture, but I am reflecting the general sentiment that exists within the veteran PvP community that reports are being made in bad faith to get rid of members of this community. If true, this would be a major weak spot in the ESO report system, as it would mean that the way the rules are applied increases the likelihood of toxicity rather than decreasing it, which I assume can't possibly be the goal ZeniMax had in mind. As promised, this is a constructive video and I want to propose a handful of possible solutions to achieve the following goals. 1. To make sure that the report system is actually used what it's meant for. And 2. To ensure players have a better understanding of what is or isn't allowed without opening up legal vulnerabilities for ZeniMax. To address both of these, first I would propose that the rules ought to be more specific and more clear. Whether it's teabagging, a name or something else, the current rules require too much guesswork and frankly luck on behalf of the player when it comes to them getting in trouble over it or not. Just let us know more clearly what is expected of us, what is okay and what isn't. I know companies are wary of doing this because they don't want to open themselves up to lawsuits, but since the TOS already claims that our accounts don't even belong to us, I don't think it can hurt to, for example, have some forum posts where we're told in more detail what type of names are not allowed. Also, that something is or isn't allowed, depending on the context, causes confusion for the players and extra work for the support agents. The more complex the rule set, the more likely a player will not know exactly what is expected of them, and the more likely a support agent might not be fully aware of the finer details of the law and make a wrong call. Just say something is okay or it's not and leave it at that. This will also make it more difficult for players to abuse this context-sensitive report system to get back at players they don't like. As it stands, the report system comes with effective instructions on how to get another player in trouble. My second proposition is that the weight of an offense should continue to matter regardless of the previous warnings on an account. No matter which way you twist it, permabanning someone over a username looks silly and draconic. Sure, there are cases in which it is warranted, like if someone has been told repeatedly to change their name but they keep trying to get around it, for example by typing a capital I instead of an L, then yeah, they are obviously trying to test the patience of the support team and a heavier punishment in that case would be completely understandable. But in the cases I mentioned before, where someone has had a name for 10 years, or another name is determined to be mildly sexual in nature, why give them a suspension or official warning at all? If they've never been in trouble for that sort of offense before, can't you just make them change their name and be done with it? And while handing out a mandatory name change, can't an agent just quickly go over the other names and guilds associated with the account? That way, you can avoid situations where someone gets in trouble over a guild name one week, and then the next week they get in even more trouble over a character name they had had since way before that. It just seems needlessly harsh. My third proposition is to aim to be more consistent. The sentiment among many players I've talked to over the past months is that in ESO, you can get suspensions pretty much at random. Yes, you can technically go into the TOS and explain many of these suspensions after the fact by pointing to certain articles within it, but this is not relevant when there is no consistency. How is it that a user named Lord Nibbler got suspended, yet every other Arcanist in the game is still named something like Tentacle Me Daddy Uwu? How is it that some players get permabanned over a series of innocuous offenses like guild and character names, yet there are people in the game who have openly and brazenly broken the rules, gotten reported for it, and gotten away with it? If you want a high-profile case, just look at how long it took the people behind this game to get Horcrux banned. Horcrux, in case you are lucky enough to have not heard of him before, was a PvP streamer who frequently got caught for what I can only describe as obvious and spectacular TOS violations, such as showing exploits on stream, trying to monetize his knowledge of said exploits, and doxing and harassing other ESO creators. If you want the full story, I encourage you to watch JTK Gaming's highly satisfying video on the saga. But my point is that the guy had like 5 permabans overturned before Microsoft, ZeniMax's parent company, finally fired him as a customer, on paper banning him from all Microsoft games and services. When people who are that openly malicious get so many chances to redeem themselves, presumably because they have an audience, it erodes the understanding normal players will have when they or their friends get in much more trouble over much lesser offenses. Also, it adds to the sense of randomness that many players have come to identify with the ESO ban system, leading some to even feel anxiety over losing their account without any knowledge of wrongdoing. This is supposed to be a game, for crying out loud. My final proposition is getting some insight into the disciplinary system. I know that, again, legal concerns might prevent this from happening, but I reiterate that it makes it more difficult to follow the rules when we don't know anything about the mechanisms behind them. For example, is the 3-strike system a policy that is used, or do warnings just pan out that way in most cases? Do warnings ever get removed from an account? ESO turned 10 years old this year, and that is a long time in which to slip up once or twice. Yes, transparency is super unattractive for companies, as it might lead to more questions. But it would help the game if the conditions of fair play could be defined a bit better, even if it's ever so slightly. We already deal with enough RNG in the rest of the game. Look, I enjoy the Elder Scrolls Online a lot, and based on my talks with other long-term players, I think I'm among the least disgruntled veterans. Like most, I do have my gripes with some aspects of the game, such as its monetization or its increasing tendency to placate to a casual audience. But I also realize that a lot of these things have to do with industry trends and business strategies that will, in most cases, be outside of the control of the people who actually work on creating this game. People who I don't doubt are at least as passionate about ESO as the players are. So it says a lot that I made an entire video to complain about this specific aspect of the game. But I did so because this issue is hurting both the ESO community and my personal enjoyment of the game in real ways. I do not think it is good advertising, and at the same time, I'm convinced it is feasible to make significant improvements here. I already made some concrete suggestions to render the whole disciplinary experience less tedious and less frustrating for everyone involved. But I believe that the key factor should be that suspensions, and especially permanent bans, ought to be recognized as the heavy measures that they are. You see, a large online RPG like the Elder Scrolls Online can mean a lot to the people playing it. Some of us make multiple characters we dream up entire backstories for. We spend days or even weeks decorating houses, we work our butts off to get difficult achievements, and spend years questing through Tamriel. I personally know a lot of people who have gone through excruciating struggles in their daily lives, but who can temporarily escape to this amazing digital world to forget about their troubles even for just a few moments. I've certainly been in that position myself. Sure, we're not always 100% satisfied with the game, but we stick with it because the good things far outweigh the few gripes we may have. And most importantly, we make a lot of friends along the way. By now, part of my social circle is ESO related. I'm not just talking about all the friends I interact with online every day, in-game or on Discord, but also some people who have become real-life friends. Some of them may not even have touched ESO for ages, but our friendships were first forged in the game. I even got to meet some guildies in Amsterdam this summer during the 10-year anniversary event, where everyone went to celebrate what a long way the game had come. During many of the developer speeches, it was emphasized how a game like ESO can only succeed if a thriving community is built around it. Which it was. The evidence was all around us there in Amsterdam and is all around us whenever we log into the game. Let's not now start excommunicating people from that community over nothing. Serious infractions merit serious punishment. Every one of us understands that. But let's show a little more leniency to people who make jokes or puns a toddler might make. Let's make it so the disciplinary system is there to protect us and not to lay down the hammer over the tiniest of missteps. Let's aim for a more pleasant user experience, and I'm sure ESO will keep thriving for another 10 years at the very least.